Hi guys, Mrs. Pierson here. Welcome to math. Don't forget, at any point in the lesson, you can always hit pause, scroll back, and listen again to what I had said. That's the benefit of being at home. I know you can't ask questions directly, but at least you can go back and hear the lesson repeated. All right, let's get started. Today's learning target, I can make and interpret line plots. Now, I know there's a lot of new things there. We actually have two verbs, two different skills that we need to do with line plots. We're going to be making a line plot and interpreting line plots. So we need to define all of these words. So you're going to see in our success criteria, the things that we need to know going into our learning target lesson is mainly going to be vocabulary today. It's going to be less computation. You'll notice computation being addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. And it's just going to be a lot more creating or drawing and reading. So you'll see a lot more reading in today's math lesson. Okay, one thing that you'll hear me say is data. Some people like to say data. I say data. Your data are just your facts or your information. And it's going to be facts and information that we're going to be graphing. We'll be graphing our data. Okay. The word interpret, that's in our learning target. Interpret just means explain the meaning. So you'll be reading a line plot and explaining what you're seeing on the line plot, interpreting what you're seeing on the line plot. Another word here is line, and you might be like, oh, that's really silly. I know what a line is. But a line in math is very specific. A line in math needs to have arrows going in both directions because a line in math shows that it's infinite. It continues on in both directions. If all you do is just draw a line, that's actually called a line segment, meaning if you draw this, that would be a line segment, a segment being a piece of a line. But a true line in math will have arrows on both sides, and you're going to be needing to know that because you'll be creating a line like that. All right, the last thing that's in our learning target that we really need to know what it is a line plot, because you're going to be making a line plot and interpreting a line plot. So what's a line plot? Well, a line plot is a graph. It's a type of graph that shows data, but it uses a number line in order to show that data. So you'll be making a number line and then plotting on it, line plot. Okay, so our next skill that we need to do, other than understanding what all of these words mean, is I can use a number line. And you might be thinking, okay, we've done this before. Well, now that you're making one, you really need to be aware of the details that make a number line accurate. So the first thing that we need to notice that I've mentioned is that on a true number line, we see arrows showing that numbers continue infinitely, meaning go on and on forever, in both directions. You might be seeing the 0 and think, no, Mrs. Pierson, the 0 would be the end. No, not in math. We know that numbers can go down into the negative infinitely. You can have negative 1,000,000, negative 200 million. So numbers would continue down all the way down into the left. And we also know numbers you can continue counting forever. So our numbers do go beyond 5. So that's why these arrows are so important when I ask you to make a number line. Be sure to have those arrows. The other thing on a number line is we want to have an interval or what the numbers are counting by. In this case, you'll notice my interval is 1. It's counting up by 1 each time. And the spacing between the numbers needs to be the same distance. I did my best. Obviously, we'll do the best we can. If we really got a ruler out and measured, it probably wouldn't be precise. But for the most part, we want our numbers spaced equidistant apart, and we want to have an interval that we're counting by. Okay, so that is I can use a number line. All right, let's get started with I can make and interpret line plots. We're going to come right here, and we're going to break that learning target apart. We're going to focus on making one, and then we'll get to interpreting after. So I can make a line plot. Well, how do we make a line plot? Well, the first step is you need to collect your data. So it depends on what you're wanting to know. We're going to pretend today that I wanted to know how many pets people have in their household. So I'm calling up, because we're being, social distancing. So I would call up different family members and find out how many pets they have. And then you're going to organize your data in some way that helps you. Some people just make a list. You can place your data in a table. You can make a tally chart, any of those things. So I'm going to place mine in a table today. I'm going to pretend that when I made my calls, there were 2 people that had no pets. There were 3 people that had 1. I had 4 people that had 2 pets. I had 1 person that had 3 pets. And I actually knew 2 people that had 4 pets. So that was the data that I collected, the number of pets that people had had. Great, so now I have my data and I need to place this data onto a number line. So that's why step 2 is going to be create a number line based on the data. Now based on the data means I need to look and see, okay, what numbers do I need to have on the number line? I don't want to be creating a number line all the way up to 20 if my highest piece of data is 4. So in this case, my lowest piece of data is 0. Some people had 0 pets. And the highest piece of data would be 4. There were some people that had 4 pets, okay? So now I have to create my number line. So I draw my line with arrows on both sides, and I know I'm gonna be counting by ones, 0 up to 4. I'm gonna do the best I can to try to make them equal distance apart. We'll see how that goes. So we'll start off with 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, I did the best I could. They might not be perfect, but it's good enough for now. All right, the third step is going to be to plot. That's why you hear that word line plot. We made a number line, and we're going to plot, that's our verb here, this information or this data onto the number line. So I'm going to plot the data onto the number line. So I take a look and I say, okay, 0 pets. How many people had 0 pets? 2. In this case, you use an X in order to represent the data. So I'm going to put 2 X's showing that 2 people had 0 pets. And it's important that the X's go above that number vertically, okay? How many people had 1 pet? Well, I take a look, 3 people. I'll be placing 3 X's above 1 pet. 2 pets, I have 4 people. 4 X's, again going vertically. 3 pets, I only have 1 person. And 4 pets, I had 2 people. So I just plotted the data onto the number line. The last thing that we need to do is make sure that we've labeled our number line so that when other people come to interpret our number line, they know what they're looking at. So we need to have a title. The title of this was how many pets people have. So I would place this title right above here, okay? How many pets? We'll just put that for now. I need a key. I need to let people know what these X's represent. So in this case, the X, and I don't want to get it mixed up with my data, I'm running out of space. I'm going to put the key up here. I would put that the X equals, in this case, it's people. That's what the X was representing. Okay, I'm going to put a box around my key. As you usually see a box around a key. Sometimes people like to put the word key so that people interpreting the information know that's the key. And the last thing is I need to label the numbers that are on the number line. We need to know what these numbers represented. And these numbers 1 through 4 were the number of pets. So I'm going to place that along the number line, number of pets. And now I have a completed line plot. Again, I've plotted the people, indicated what that means. I have a title. I've labeled my number line. Now we have a number line, okay? That's how we make a line plot. We're going to come back to this with some questions to interpret in a minute. We're going to come over here. Sometimes your data is not necessarily in whole number form like our pets were. Sometimes it's going to be in fraction form. So you also need to know how to make a number line using fractions. And it's going to be the same thing. I'm just going to have different intervals. Instead of having whole number intervals, now I'm going to have fraction intervals. Okay. I also wanted to show you that this time my data, I listed it just in least to greatest instead of putting it on a table. That's another way that you can. So I've already placed my title, time spent on chores. I pretended like I was doing chores and keeping track of how long chores were taking me. So one chore took me 1/4 of an hour. One chore took me all the way up to 1.5 hours, okay? And everything in between. So looking at our number line that we need to create, my lowest piece of data is 1/4. My highest piece of data is 1.5. So that's the range that I'm going to need to have on my number line. So I'm going to do the best I can to try to space those out. I'm going to be counting by intervals of 1/4 this time. So I create my number line. even though I don't have any data that goes all the way up to 2, for me personally, I wanted to have it just between 0 and 2. It wouldn't be wrong if you stopped at 1/2 because that's your highest piece of data. You could have done that. I chose not to. I chose to just do a couple higher, but that's up to you. As long as you're counting by the same number, your intervals has to stay the same. All right, so my second step, now that I've created my number line, is to plot on that number line. Now the X, I've already put my key, equals chore. So now I'm just gonna plot the chores. 1/4, I only have one of those. Remember the X goes vertically above the number. 1/2, I have 2, so I would place 2 X's. 3/4, I have 3. 1 whole. 1/4, I have 1 of them. And 1/2, I have 2. And I don't have any higher than that. I just wanted to go up to 2 for my number line. So now I've plotted my data. I also have labeled what these fractions represent. They're the time spent on chores. If there's a unit that needs to be included, this was in terms of hours. If I was measuring something, it might be inches. So you always want to include whatever this is representing the unit. And again, I have my key and I have my title. So I've completed making my line plot. Okay, now our second piece of our learning target is interpreting it. So we're going to practice that now using the one that we just created, time spent on chores. So let's start with our first question. What was the most common or most frequent time spent on chores? So we're going to look at that, and the one that I see the most is 3/4. I have 3 chores that took me 3/4. So the way that I would interpret that is, wow, 3/4 was the one that had the most. That's it. For number 2, what was the longest time spent? So what was the longest time spent on a chore? 1.5 is the highest piece of data that I have. That's the longest time that I spent. What was the shortest? Again, interpreting the data, 1/4 of an hour was the shortest chore that I had. How many times did we do chores? How would we figure that out? Well, we know that the X represents the chore, so I would count how many X's I have to see how many chores were done. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 chores. So that's interpreting the data. This was making the line plot. Okay? We're going to go back over to our pets line plot and do a little practicing of interpreting there. So if we're going to come back here again, remember X was the number of people and our line represented how many pets, okay? So here comes your first question. How many people have 2 pets? So take a look at that and try that question. How many people have 2 pets? Okay, hopefully you've looked at 2 pets because we know these numbers represent how many pets. And the X's represent people. How many people have 2 pets? 1, 2, 3, 4. Your answer should have been 4 people. Okay, let's try another question. Okay, what was the most common number of pets? What was the most common, meaning the one that people had most often? Most common number of pets to have? So remember, these numbers represent the number of pets, and the most common, again, the answer would be 2. 4 people had 2 pets. That was the most common in my survey. Let's try another question. What was the least amount of pets people had? What was the least amount of pets that people had? So if you're, again, looking, these numbers represent the pets, the X's represent the people. The least amount of pets, when I surveyed, I did have some people that had no pets at all. So the answer would be having 0 pets. 0 pets would be the lowest in my data. Okay? We'll have one more question. How many people were surveyed about their pets? How many people did I survey and ask about pets? So take a look at that. I'll give you a minute. Now remember, your X represents the people. So how many people did I contact and ask about pets. All right, let's take a look. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 people, okay? All right, so we've been making a line plot. We've practiced interpreting. We're gonna do one more because instead of an exit slip today, it's a little difficult to do an exit slip with this, so we're just gonna do one last practice together. I've made the line plot ahead of time. The data that I collected was rainfall for 2 weeks. So for 2 weeks, I kept documenting each day how much rain fell. This will give us some more practice with number lines that have fractions because that really is more focusing on our 5th grade number lines, our more fraction number lines. So rainfall for 2 weeks, I have my title, I have my key, the X is going to equal the day, and then my number line is going to represent the rainfall, and this time I do need to have units. It was inches that it rained that day. That's generally how we calculate how much rainfall is we look at how many inches rained that day, okay? I collected my data, I placed it, I already plotted it onto the number line, so my line plot is complete, and now we're just gonna practice interpreting the line plot, okay? So your first question is, how many days did it rain a half an inch? How many days did it rain half an inch? So take a look at that line plot, interpret that question. How many days did it rain a half an inch? So we would look at half an inch, because we know these represent the inches of rainfall. How many days? The X represents days, so I would count 1, 2. 2 days, it rained half an inch. Okay. Number 2, what amount of rain occurred most often? So while I was plotting each day, what amount of rain occurred most often? So the question's asking about the amount of rain. So which amount was the most often? If we take a look, 1/4 of an inch happened 5 times. There were 5 days that I had 1/4 of an inch of rain. So number 2 would be 1/4 of an inch. Okay, how are we doing? All right, number 3, how many days did it not rain? How many days did it not rain? So inches, if it didn't rain, that would be 0, right? 0 inches of rain means there was no rain that day. How many days? The X represents days. So 1, 2, 3, there were 3 days that it did not rain at all. Okay? All right, number 4. What was the most amount of rain in one day? What was the most amount of rain in one day? So in one day, what was the most amount of rain that we would have gotten in that day? So we want to look at our highest amount of inches. Now on my line plot, I did put a 2, but I don't have an X there. There's no day that it rained 2 inches. So you want to be careful not to just look at the highest number on your number line. You want to look at your highest piece of data. So 1 3/4 inches, I do have one day that it rained 1 3/4 inches. So that would be my highest amount of rain. Okay, and I made these up. This wasn't real rain for the last 2 weeks, just so you know. All right, I do have a challenge question because I know for some of you, you're going to want a little bit more of a challenge. Don't feel stressed out about this, but sometimes you might come across questions where you're asked to do something a little bit more complex than what we've been doing. So your challenge question is, what was the total amount of rainfall? What was the total amount of rainfall? So that one might take you a minute. Before I ask you to hit pause, I'm going to give you a couple of hints. So total amount, hopefully we know that means we're going to be adding all of the rainfall. We haven't added fractions in a while. We need to have like denominators. So you have 2 choices. You can either change the halves into fourths, so you can add all your fractions. Another trick is, instead of adding fractions, you can turn these into decimals. So we've been practicing how 1/4 is equivalent to 0.25, 25/100. 1/2 is equivalent to 0.5 or 5/10. 3/4 is equivalent to 0.75 or 75/100. So you can add these as decimals, that would be faster, or you have to add like fractions. So I'm going to ask you to hit pause, and when you come back, I'll give you the answer to that challenge question. Go ahead and hit pause. Okay, welcome back. Let's see how you did. I have the answer. And the answer is going to be 7.5 inches. Or if you did it decimal wise, you might have 7.5 or 7 5/10 inches. Both are correct because both are equivalent. That's it for today for line plot. Usual routine, we'll be practicing Tuesday, we'll be practicing Wednesday, and then Thursday will be your quiz. Hopefully we did okay. Best of luck, and thanks for joining.